In the heart of the Middle Ages, long before Halloween became candy, costumes, and parties, it was a night of fear. A night when villagers whispered prayers, locked their doors, and dared not look outside. For in their world, the boundary between the living and the dead was thin and fragile, and on this night, demons, witches, and restless spirits could walk freely among mortals. What we call Halloween today was then a night of dread, of superstition, and of survival. And tonight, we will uncover the chilling truth of how people in the Middle Ages lived, feared, and trembled when darkness fell on All Hallows' Eve. Before we go deeper into this descent through medieval nightmares, don't forget, subscribe now, leave a like, and share this story of terror with others. Because once you hear what people truly believed, you may never see Halloween the same way again. Picture a medieval village, isolated, surrounded by forests so thick that sunlight barely touched the ground. At night, those woods became an abyss of whispers. Wolves howled in the distance, their cries blending with the wind that clawed at the roofs of thatched cottages. For peasants, life itself was hard enough. Disease, famine, endless toil. But the night of October 31st was different. On that night, they believed the gates of the afterlife swung open. The souls of the dead wandered, some searching for warmth, others for revenge. The veil between worlds was fragile, and those who were unprepared risked becoming prey. The church tried to impose order, creating All Saints' Day on November 1st and All Souls' Day after it. But the old pagan fears were not so easily erased. People still lit bonfires, still placed offerings of bread and ale outside their doors, hoping to appease wandering spirits. In many villages, the poor went from house to house begging for food in exchange for prayers for the dead. This tradition, known as souling, was a distant ancestor of modern trick-or-treating. But for medieval peasants, it was no game. Refusing a soul beggar could mean a curse upon your household, a whisper that your loved ones might not rest in peace. Imagine the scene. A knock on your wooden door, the sound echoing in the cold air. You open it to find ragged figures, their faces hidden in the dark. They ask for bread, for ale, for offerings. If you deny them, they may leave, but they may also whisper your name to the spirits that roam that night. Fear made generosity a weapon, and the poor became messengers of the dead. But the dead were not the only beings feared on Halloween night in the Middle Ages. Witches were everywhere, or so the people believed. The figure of the witch as an old crone flying on a broomstick was born in this era, forged in fire and hysteria. Women who lived alone, healers who worked with herbs, widows who muttered prayers in the dark, all were suspected of consorting with the devil. The church warned that witches gathered on nights like these, convening in Sabbaths with demons, casting curses, poisoning crops and stealing the souls of children. And so, villagers feared the night, not just for spirits, but for the living agents of evil who walked among them. A lonely candle flickering in the woods might be a traveler, or it might be the sign of a witch summoning unholy powers. To protect themselves, people carved faces into turnips and gourds, placing candles inside to ward off evil. These were the ancestors of our jack-o'-lanterns, grim, twisted, faces staring into the dark, daring any demon to enter. Still, protection was fragile, for the Middle Ages were haunted not only by witches and spirits, but by the greatest terror of all, the plague. When the Black Death swept across Europe, killing millions, people believed it was punishment from God, or worse, the devil's feast on souls. On Halloween night, fear of the dead grew unbearable. Villagers claimed to see skeletal figures roaming the fields, lanterns glowing with unnatural fire, processions of the damned wandering toward the churchyard. These visions fed the imagination of a world already broken by suffering, convincing peasants that Halloween was the devil's chosen night. Legends spread like wildfire. In France, people whispered of the Danse Macabre, the dance of death, where skeletons rose from graves at midnight to dance in the churchyards, mocking the living. Musicians claimed to hear spectral fiddles playing in the wind, a music no human hand could create. If one joined the dance, they would be dragged to their grave before dawn. In Germany, peasants believed that on Halloween night, wild hunts led by ghostly riders swept across the skies. To see them was to invite death. To hear their horns meant your soul was already marked. Superstitions multiplied. Cats, especially black ones, were feared as witches' companions, demons in disguise, or even cursed souls. An owl hooting near your home was not just an animal, it was a messenger of death. Even simple accidents, spilled salt, a broken mirror, a candle blown out by a gust of wind, were omens of the grave. On Halloween, every shadow stretched too long, every noise carried a warning, and always fire was the only shield. Bonfires were lit on hillsides, massive flames meant to drive away the darkness and keep demons at bay. Villagers would leap over the flames for protection, herds of cattle were driven through the smoke to cleanse them of evil, and ashes were scattered on fields to ensure the soil remained fertile. Fire was light, fire was safety. Without it, the night belonged to shadows. But fire could not protect against everything. In many villages, tales were told of the restless dead, souls denied entry to heaven or hell, cursed to wander. They could appear as pale figures drifting through fog, as shadows at the corner of your vision, or as terrifying apparitions knocking at your window. People left offerings of food not just for saints, but for these damned souls, hoping to appease them. But if a restless dead chose your home, there was little you could do. Consider one chilling tale from England, whispered in hushed voices. A farmer refused to share bread with a souling beggar on Halloween night. That same week, his crops withered, his livestock died, and his child fell ill. On the following Halloween, neighbors swore they saw the farmer's ghost wandering the fields, carrying a lantern, his eyes glowing with fire. Was it punishment from God, or the curse of a beggar empowered by the spirits of the dead? No one dared to say. The Middle Ages were a world ruled by fear, and Halloween was its darkest hour. In every flickering candle, people saw the face of the unknown. In every shadow, they imagined a demon. For us, Halloween is fun. For them, it was survival. Each year, when October's end drew near, they braced themselves, not for candy or laughter, but for a night when the veil between worlds vanished, and every nightmare became possible. As the night deepens, the medieval imagination becomes even more restless. Beyond the bonfires and prayers for protection, the shadows themselves seem to whisper. In villages isolated by forests and mountains, people lived with constant fear of the unknown. Halloween was not only a calendar date, it was a threshold, a fragile veil between the seen and the unseen, the living and the dead. Every sound in the dark could be a sign, every gust of wind a spirit passing by. In castles and monasteries, the clergy often tried to guide the people with sermons and rituals, reminding them that faith in God should dispel fear. Yet even the most devout priests could not deny the stories circulating around the villages. Tales of wandering spirits, restless souls of those who died without proper burial, witches gathering under the full moon, and devils tempting the weak. Fear was a form of control, but also a reality that everyone felt in their bones. One of the most terrifying beliefs was the wild hunt. People thought that during certain nights, especially close to All Hallows' Eve, a spectral cavalcade of hunters swept through the skies. Led by a dark figure, sometimes described as a demon, sometimes as a cursed king, the hunt brought storms and disaster. Those who dared to walk outside during the wild hunt could be swept away, lost forever, or forced to join the ghostly riders. Mothers would keep their children indoors, windows shut, candles extinguished, praying the hunters would pass, unnoticed. Equally dreadful were the stories of revenants, corpses that returned from their graves. Unlike the spirits of folklore, these beings had bodies, rotting, yet animated by some unholy force. In medieval chronicles, monks wrote of corpses rising to torment the living, spreading disease, and terrorizing entire villages. People believed the dead could rise if they were buried improperly, or if they had been excommunicated, cursed, or guilty of terrible sins. The only way to stop a revenant was to exhume the body, cut off its head, and burn it. These accounts would later inspire many of the vampire legends we know today. Witches were another constant fear. Though witch hunts would peak in later centuries, in the Middle Ages the seeds of suspicion were already planted. Women who lived alone, especially widows or healers with knowledge of herbs, were often accused of dark practices. On Halloween, people whispered that witches gathered at crossroads or desolate fields, offering rituals to the devil. Cats, especially black ones, were seen as their companions, sinister creatures with glowing eyes in the dark. Some communities even banned keeping such animals during October, afraid they were linked to sorcery. Alongside these terrors, Halloween also carried rituals of protection. Families carved turnips into lanterns, placing a candle inside to ward off evil spirits, a practice that centuries later transformed into the pumpkin jack-o'-lantern in America. Holy water was sprinkled on doors and prayers to saints were recited with special intensity. Bells rang through the night, their echoes chasing away spirits. Yet, despite all these measures, fear lingered. Because everyone knew, once darkness fell on Halloween, anything could happen. Folklore also blended with morality tales. Parents would warn their children with chilling stories. If you disobeyed, you might be taken by the wandering dead or lured into the forest by a will-o'-the-wisp. These glowing lights, seen in marshes, were believed to be the souls of the damned, tricking travelers into losing their way. The danger of straying too far from the village was very real, for forests and swamps held wolves, bandits, and other perils. But in the medieval imagination, these natural dangers became entangled with supernatural ones, making the night even more terrifying. Halloween feasts were paradoxical. On one hand, they celebrated the harvest, gathering food, drink, and joy after hard labor. On the other hand, they were tinged with darkness, for people never forgot that death was near. Songs and dances were mixed with solemn prayers, laughter with shivers. Masks were worn not just for fun, but as protection, disguising oneself to confuse the spirits. The medieval Halloween was a strange balance of hope and horror, of faith and fear. In monasteries, monks would write about these customs, sometimes condemning them as pagan remnants, sometimes acknowledging them as impossible to erase from popular tradition. The church tried to channel this energy toward the veneration of saints, reinforcing the sacred meaning of All Hallows' Eve. Still, even under Christian influence, people clung to their older fears. After all, the night was long, and faith did not always silence the noises in the dark. The Black Death, which swept through Europe in the 14th century, only deepened these fears. Death was no longer a distant possibility. It was everywhere. Graves overflowed. Priests could not keep up with burials, and mass hysteria spread. In this context, Halloween took on an even darker shade. People imagined that the dead were restless, angry, or seeking company among the living. Skeletons and dancing death motifs appeared in art and songs, reminding everyone that no one could escape the grave. The Danse Macabre, or Dance of Death, became a popular theme, showing kings, peasants, clergy, and nobles all dragged into the same dance by skeletal figures. On Halloween, this image felt painfully real. Some chronicles even tell of villagers hearing strange music at night, like invisible flutes calling from the graveyard. Was it imagination, fear, or something more? To those living in the Middle Ages, there was no doubt. The dead were near, and Halloween was the time when their presence was strongest. Families would leave bread and milk on the doorstep, offerings to wandering souls, hoping to appease them. Others placed iron objects like knives or nails near the bed to keep spirits away. Iron was believed to repel the supernatural, a weapon of humans against forces they could not understand. The boundary between story and reality was fragile. A candle flickering unexpectedly, a sudden cold wind, or the howl of a wolf was enough to make entire households tremble. Children hid under blankets, mothers whispered prayers, and fathers stood guard with torches. The sense of vulnerability was profound. Life was fragile, the world dangerous, and the supernatural seemed to lurk just beyond sight. As midnight approached, the fear climaxed. It was said that at this hour the dead walked freely, Witches danced in secret circles, and demons roamed the earth. For many, the only defense was faith. Churches filled with those seeking sanctuary, chanting psalms to keep evil at bay. Yet outside, the bonfires continued to burn, villagers telling stories, both to entertain and to remind each other of the dangers. These stories, passed from mouth to mouth, would survive centuries, shaping the way we imagine Halloween even today. By the time dawn arrived, relief washed over the people. The sun's light seemed to banish the shadows, silence the whispers, and scatter the spirits. Children returned to the fields, farmers resumed their work, and life went on. But deep down, everyone knew the fear would return with the next autumn, the next All Hallows' Eve. Because in the medieval mind, Halloween was not a single night. It was a reminder that life and death, light and darkness were always intertwined, and the boundary between them could vanish with the fall of the sun. Thus, the legends and fears of Halloween in the Middle Ages became more than stories. They were survival strategies, moral lessons, and reflections of a world where danger was constant and the supernatural was ever present. These tales echo even now, centuries later, whenever the air turns cold, the leaves fall, and the shadows grow long. Halloween is no longer exactly as it was in the Middle Ages, but its roots in fear, mystery, and the human fascination with death and the beyond are still alive. The medieval voices still whisper in the dark, reminding us that on Halloween, the line between worlds is thinner than we dare to imagine.